voice17104.com. This is Zanetta Wingfield, and you're listening to the voice17104.com. The voice17104.com.
Welcome, my brothers and sisters, to the Richard James Show on 17104, The Voice. Greetings, my friends, and salutations. Welcome again to the Richard James Show. Thank God, it's a pleasure to be here on earth, to be able to lift up truth, to be able to share information, and to be able to just learn things. And I continue to learn. We're going to deal with an individual known for passive resistance and nonviolence in his struggle to create an independent India. Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi is really known for passive resistance. He's one of the individuals that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King aspired to be like and to learn from. I worked in the Robert B. Casey Sr. administration and governor's office as the director of the Commonwealth's affirmative action program, which included affirmative action in terms of employment and included affirmative action in terms of business. And we lifted up, shall we say, a movement which was peaceful, which was nonviolent. We put together principles, guidelines that we could use to try to lift up people who have been discriminated against, to lift up business that were discriminated against. The whole theory was to try to equalize the situation in terms of minorities, in terms of women, in terms of people that have been discriminated against. Of course, I came out of a history of being involved directly in the civil rights movement. Started out in the city of Chester, Pennsylvania, which is a suburb 13 miles south of Philadelphia, Philadelphia suburb. And we lived in a little town that was totally segregated, one who had a rich history in terms of his whole creation of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and the state of Pennsylvania. And in fact, Chester was one of the original capitals of the state of Pennsylvania. Chester was where William Penn first landed. I'm in Pennsylvania, and worked to establish itself. Chester at that time was called Upland, but historically that's where it was. But that's where I learned the whole philosophy of passive resistance and nonviolence. We had a brutal police force in Chester back in those days, very, very, very violent, who tried to oppose us and tried to stop us back in those days. So we had a philosophy of nonviolence. We would never attack. We would never try to create a situation where we were on the offensive. That was not our thing. But we were nonviolent, but we preserved the right, which is within the law, of self-protection. But we preserved the right for self-protection. That's not what Gandhi would say. Gandhi, in no means, lifted up violent rebellion. That was not his philosophy. That was not his aim. But there have been questions that have been risen about whether or not Gandhi, who was Hindu, was in fact had some racist belief. If you're familiar with the Hindu religion, you're familiar with the fact that they have a group of people that they call the untouchables. And to my knowledge, my information, the untouchables were really Black. There's over 12 million people of African descent, or Blacks, in the continent of India. And India at this point is getting very close to having 2 billion people. It has over 1.5 billion people in the country of India. As a matter of fact, it's believed that as India's population continues to grow, that it would surpass China at some point, which is the largest population in the world. China has close to 2 billion people, larger population than India, but China also has a restrictive law only allowing a family at this point to have maybe 2 or 3 kids. I'm not sure exactly which one it is. So India does not have any such restrictions. So you still have some large families that are developed. And so with the rate of growth in India, it is thought that sooner or later that India might surpass China in terms of population. But with this philosophy of the Hindu in terms of untouchables, and not all Indians subscribe, even all Hindus subscribe to this untouchable. I'm very blessed to have a number of specialists. My doctors are all Indian, and God knows they take care of me. They were wonderful people. They're not racist. They do not even pretend to be that kind of way. Not everybody, just because they're Hindu, necessarily racist. But it was thought that there was a dark side of Mahatma Gandhi, in which early on that he believed in the whole Hindu thing, untouchables. He was a vegetarian, and nothing wrong with being a vegetarian as long as it physically does what you need for it to do. And he was in fact a Hindu. He was a great guy. He was a man that believed in love. My thing is, in terms of any kind of philosophy that you come up with, that it has to be grounded in love. And if you love people, love individuals, and you really want to do some good, if you really want to help people and pull them up out of their situation, whatever your philosophy is, it's got to be grounded in love. And according to philosophy of Mahatma Gandhi, from what I've read and what I've studied, that was the basis of it. And so that would make you begin to take a look or take a turn at any kind of racist belief. But we're going to lift up and give you the documentation. We're going to do a couple of videos that will give you the basic philosophy of this man and the basic philosophy and what it was built on and as it was presented. But we want you to listen very carefully and gather your own opinion. You do your own thing. You believe what you believe in. And trust me, I think you'll be on the right path. Okay, just a brief introduction program. And now we're going to look at the dark side of Mahatma Gandhi. We're going to lift that up and we're going to roll that video. We'll see what it says, and then we'll come back. Thank you.
Of India, a man who, through a campaign of non-violence, freed his country from the clutches of British imperialists. He was not just a father of his nation, but for some, he was considered almost saintly. He also liked to sleep alone in beds with his grandnieces and other young women, and held some shockingly racist views toward other races. Today, we'll shock some of you. We might even offend some of you. But we also think by the time we got to the end of this show, you will have also changed your mind as to how you think about Mr. Gandhi. Before we get to that, here's an abridged introduction to the man born Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi on October 2nd, 1869. He grew up in fairly comfortable surroundings, seeing that his father held the position of Chief Minister of the Indian state of Porbandar. His mother was said to be a very pious woman, which is where the young Gandhi discovered the beliefs of cherishing the simple things in life. The religious devotion he saw by his mother would foster in him a sense of ethics that he later became famous for on a global scale. Things such as nonviolence, tolerance of others' beliefs, vegetarianism, and acts of self-purification were his badge. They were also steeped in hypocrisy at times. His beliefs were put to the test when he went over to London to study. Before he left India, he swore to his mom to not fall for the enticements of modern life, to stay clear of women and meat, and generally to uphold the beliefs she taught him. But while studying law in London, he witnessed late 19th century industry and all the horrors that could come with it. The streets of London were certainly not paved with gold. Far from it, many Londoners with their ragged clothes and dirty faces didn't seem to be enjoying Britain's industrial wealth. Gandhi witnessed poverty, but he also witnessed activism there. It was the same when he went over to South Africa, where he saw much of the population living in abject poverty. Gandhi might have been an educated lawyer by this time, but that didn't mean he wasn't told, like other Indians, that because of his skin color, He wasn't allowed to walk on certain footpaths or enter certain buildings. There's more to this story, but let us just tell you the good Gandhi story first. He was disgusted. There he was, an educated man who considered himself as much English as he was Indian, but treated as a second-class citizen by the Europeans. One time he was kicked out of a train coach because of his race. Like many other people of color, his rights were taken away from him. On other occasions, he was beaten up for not making room for a white passenger. If that wasn't bad enough, he was barred for staying at certain hotels, even though he had the money to pay for them. The story goes that Gandhi understood the many wrongs committed by the imperialists, and so it was at this juncture in his life when he decided he was going to bring about change. But his resistance, in line with his religious beliefs, had to be peaceful. One of the most famous lines is, "Every revolution begins with a single act of defiance." And this is how he began fighting for the rights of Indians. This is how he got a name for himself as an activist, which on one dark day in Durban, South Africa, almost got him lynched by a mob of angry white folks. He spent several years in South Africa, but he knew that India needed him. When he announced his departure from Africa, a statesman wrote, "The saint has left our shores." This statesman was a white South African. He finished the sentence, "I hope forever." Back in India, Gandhi carried on fighting for people's rights. He'd been beaten up, he'd been jailed, he'd been harangued and oppressed, and he still preached peace. He might have supported the British war effort, but he also never shied away from criticizing the British imperialists. We apologize to our Gandhi enthusiasts for skipping over many years of his life, but we think most of you know that this man became one of the most powerful people in India. His form of Indian nationalism was embraced by much of the country, most of the country in fact, and they started to believe that with the right will, the Indian people could be free of the British. His activism got him arrested on March 10, 1922, and he spent the next 2 years behind bars, but he wasn't done by any means. In the years to follow, he would lead many of the Indian people to peacefully revolt against many facets of the British rule. His followers, and there were many, went to prison for their acts of civil disobedience. In 1932, while in prison again, he undertook a now famous fast over the disenfranchisement of those at the bottom of India's caste system, people called the Untouchables. When Indians saw how willing Gandhi was to die for his people, for the rights of the country's poorest, it spread hope through the hearts of the nation. Then the Second World War happened, and again the Indians were expected to fight for the British. But this time the Indian National Congress wanted a form of self-government if it were to throw Indian nationals onto the battlefield. Close to 90,000 of them would eventually die, not to mention the perhaps 2.5 million total Indian casualties of war. Before the war ended, Gandhi had already started the Quit India movement. And then on August 15, 1947, India finally got its independence. Okay, so what you've just heard is the condensed story of a man who saw cruelty and unfairness in the world and wanted to do something about it. He then took considerable risks in fighting the perpetrators of those wrongs, and he made it his life's work. It's now time we got into costume and became the devil's advocate. Here's a quote for you. Hitler killed 5 million Jews. It's the greatest crime of our time, but the Jews should have offered themselves to the butcher's knife. They should have thrown themselves into the sea from cliffs. It would have aroused the world and the people of Germany. As it is, they succumbed anyway in their millions. Yes, those were the thoughts of Gandhi. He was taking nonviolence to another level, and he was not surprisingly condemned for saying such things. While his belief might not exactly fall into an ugly truth category, his moral absolutism made no sense at all to some people, especially those under attack from Germany. When the Nazis were bombing England, Gandhi seemed to think the Brits should not bother fighting back. This is what he said about that. "I would like you to lay down the arms you have as being useless for saving you or humanity. You will invite Herr Hitler and Signor Mussolini to take what they want of the countries you call your possessions. If these gentlemen choose to occupy your homes, you will vacate them. If they do not give you free passage out, you will allow yourselves, man, woman, and child, to be slaughtered, but you will refuse to owe allegiance to them." In hindsight, we all now know the many added horrors that would have occurred had governments followed Gandhi's instructions and just allowed Nazi Germany to do what it wanted. His assertion also sounds much worse when you consider some people now say that Gandhi was a racist. In 2019, in the African nation of Malawi, people were saying just that. In Ghana, that same year, a Gandhi statue was taken down at a university. You might think that's strange, given what we told you about Gandhi fighting for people's rights when he was in South Africa. Well, in Ghana, many people right now don't have much love for Gandhi, which can be seen on Twitter when folks use the hashtag Gandhi must fall. Maybe you think it's a bit severe, but it sounds righteous enough when you know some of the racist things Gandhi wrote back when he was in Africa. For instance, he once wrote that white folks, despite their flaws, should be the predominating race in South Africa. You see, the young Gandhi, as you know, went over to England to get himself an education. It seems it was his dealings with the ruling British that convinced him that Europeans were just more civilized than the black people in Africa. We should say that he changed his entire stance in time and became an anti-racist, but it wasn't always like that. He also wrote in a letter summing up the beliefs to the British that the general belief seems to prevail in the colony that the Indians are a little better, if at all, than the savages or the natives of Africa. He absolutely thought that many Africans were savages, and he used derogatory language too when referring to black people, such as the term kafir. In 1904, he wrote another letter stating that he was upset about these people living amongst Indians, saying, "About the mixing of the Kafirs with the Indians, I must confess I feel most strongly." He wrote that as long as blacks were mixed with Indians, then diseases such as the plague would further spread. You can now understand why some people are now calling Gandhi out. They also accuse him of being a hypocrite, saying that he didn't believe in the rights of Africans at all, while also working with the British government in segregating whites from blacks. A stunning example of this is when Gandhi petitioned the colonial government in South Africa to ensure the Indian people didn't have to share the same queue as black people when they went to the post office in Durban. He didn't think it was fair that Indians couldn't queue with the whites. Some people now try to cover for Gandhi, saying he was just a product of his times, although one would think that a person of high intelligence would still have known right from wrong, even if they didn't always fight for what was right. Others now say that Gandhi was a card-carrying member of the Aryan Brotherhood, and no, we don't mean that bunch of violent, angry neo-Nazis whose pastime is smoking amphetamines and sharpening shivs. We mean the Brotherhood that wore suits and smoked pipes in dingy boardrooms. For example, when asked just how racist Gandhi was, one of his new critics wrote, "Gandhi believed in the Aryan Brotherhood. This involved whites and Indians higher up than Africans on the civilized scale. To that extent, he was a racist. To the extent that he wrote Africans out of history or was keen to join with whites in their subjugation, he was a racist." As we say, Gandhi shifted his stance, but how much he shifted we can't say. The question is, when he was telling people to lie down for the Germans, did any part of him still believe in superior races? You have to remember, when Gandhi was in South Africa, it wasn't as if black people hadn't already for years been fighting for their rights. You can't just say Gandhi was a product of the times, because he knew very well that a race of people rightly felt they were violently oppressed. When Gandhi was in England, he spent most of his time hanging out with intellectuals and the odd vegetarian, and then once he was in South Africa, he found himself having to share the same train carriages and join the same queues of a people he referred to as coolies. He hated this. That much was evident in 1906 when, during the Zulu Rebellion, Gandhi supported the British in what he termed the Revolt of the Kafirs. These people, who he pretty much believed were barbarians, he said deserved British rule because they spent most of their days in indolence and nakedness. Again, people say you have to forgive him for his foibles. They say he had his road to Damascus moment and he changed his views. Nonetheless, as his critics still point out, even if he did hold some racist views on racial hierarchies, why could he not ever refer to African people as Africans and not coolies or Kafirs? His utter lack of respect for Africans was evident when he attended a dinner party held by the British imperialist Hugh Wyndham, 4th Baron Leconfield. Gandhi was overjoyed to be seated next to some of the empire's toffs, and he quite enjoyed his aubergine cutlets and plum tart. He gave a speech about his leaving Africa, saying he hoped the Europeans of South Africa would take a humanitarian and imperial view of the Indian question. But one of his biographers pointed something else out. That was the fact that Gandhi never said any farewells to any Africans, even though he'd been in Africa. That biographer said Gandhi didn't think Africans deserved a goodbye message. We hammered this point home just a little bit, only because you have to admit that it's quite a huge deal when a human rights advocate fighting to end discrimination went along with discrimination and human rights abuses. If he was flawed in public, what about his personal life? Well, things get even more strange now. Gandhi once wrote to his son that a person who marries in order to satisfy his carnal desire is lower than even the beast. He had no time for casual sex and human relations, and he himself became celibate at age 38. He'd gotten married when he was 13 but turned away from sex later. So then why did the Guardian newspaper write that Gandhi was prone to having weird, manipulative flirtations with young unmarried women? Why also in 2021 did some people in California knock down a statue of the great man? The answer is that some people think Gandhi wasn't just hypocritical when it came to racial equality, but also in relation to his thoughts on sexual purity. When it was decided that the statue in California should be re-erected, a group called the Organization for Minorities of India was dead set against it. When asked why, a spokesperson for the group explained Gandhi was instrumental in influencing national treatment of women in India. He said, "My life is my message," and the life he modeled for the nation was one of sexually exploiting his grandnieces and many other teenage girls under the guise of performing celibacy experiments. Gandhi stands accused of being sexist, racist, and also committing creepy acts with young women. Like other spiritual leaders that have tainted the earth with their footsteps, Gandhi has been called a predator, which we don't have to tell you is a really bad look for someone touted as being a man of peace with a pure soul. Nonetheless, when people are accused of such things, we should hope there's a lot of evidence or even some evidence to back it up. Well, he was against birth control unless it was the kind of control that involved a man or woman taming their animal passions. Once he said if people have too much sex, they will become soft-brained, unhinged, in fact mental and moral wrecks. Then, when he was an aging man in the 30s, he asked his young grandniece to get into bed with him. He told her that it was an experiment to see if he could control his own animal passions. As bad as it looked, he didn't hide what he was doing, which was to test or further test his conquest of sexual desire. It was written that he didn't care what people thought about it. One author said, when a close disciple heard of Gandhi's experiments with celibacy, he had threatened to leave the ashram unless Gandhi rectified his predatory behavior. His choices were clearly never acceptable. These experiments not only involved his grandniece, but other young women and girls at the ashram. He never did have intercourse with them, but let's just say he really tested himself. As for how his wife felt about all this, Gandhi never seemed to show her much love. He once said he couldn't bear to look at her in the face, and is famously known for denying her life-saving drugs. He certainly took a lot of criticism for the 2-week celibacy experiments, and he still does now, just as he does for many of his more conservative beliefs regarding sex and gender. To give you an idea about those beliefs, his answer to 2 women being attacked by men in the street was for them to shave off their hair so they were no longer attractive to men. Yeah, he blamed the women for a male problem. He even once went as far as to say that a woman's menstruation cycle was actually a manifestation of the distortion of a woman's soul by her sexuality. For many people, Gandhi was a racist with a predilection for sexually focused predatory behavior. Others say, leave him alone. The man did good on the whole and can be said to have done something not many people can attest to in actually changing the world. Today, we've just played the devil's advocate and we'll let you decide what to make of Gandhi. The darker parts of his life don't figure much when it comes to his legacy, but hey, mythologies are rarely interested in nuance. Now, you need to watch another myth-busting extravaganza, The Ugly Truth About Mother Teresa, or have a look at this.
Okay, how much of that is true and how much of it is not true, I don't know. But we've lifted up the so-called dark side of Mahatma Gandhi. Like I said, I know some of that is nonsensical. Some of it I know is accurate in terms of their whole philosophy, the caste system. The Dravidians were the original people, Black people from India. The Aryans came in and they fought a war with the Dravidians and defeated them. And then the Aryans took over. The Aryans were basically Hindu, and the Black people became, particularly, and most of them came up out of India, were considered so-called untouchables. And so, in terms of his development, his education, his training, his rearing, is not impossible to believe that he had some racist, what I would consider racist tendencies or racist thoughts, but with his philosophy of non-violence and passive resistance, and his fight against the imperialists or the English or the British Empire, which was indeed the largest and strongest empire in the world at that particular time. And going into London to get that training, that legal training, it's not hard to believe that some of that stuff in terms of racism and that approach may have been in him. But there was also a counter in that it was not all him. That's absolutely not true to say that it was all him. So we have another video we want to lift up on the philosophy and culture of Mahatma Gandhi and his nonviolent approach, rooted and based on what we call love. Okay, we're gonna roll the next video, Chris, and we'll see what they have to do.
Welcome to the session on contemporary socio-political philosophy. In this session, we discuss Mahatma Gandhi's theory of Satyagraha. The theory of Satyagraha, Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi was a great personality and humanistic thinker of 20th century. In human world, such thinkers or personalities are born in whose theory and practice there might be complete uniformity. The ideas which Gandhi put before human world, he put them in practice his own life to the maximum extent possible. The technique of satyagraha is one of them. The word satyagraha is Sanskrit in origin. It is a compound word formed of satya meaning truth and agraha meaning clinging, that is, clinging to truth. The literal meaning of satyagraha is insistence on truth and force derivable from such insistence in order to cure evil. Satyagraha therefore means adherence to truth. Adherence to truth is also adherence to that which is truly real within us, our spirit. Satyagraha is truth force, but truth is soul or spirit. It is therefore also soul force. In English, it is translated as truth force or love force or soul force. It is a particular philosophy and practice within the broader overall category generally known as non-violent resistance or civil resistance. Satyagraha is an ethical weapon used only by men inclined to the ethical way of life. Gandhi thus concludes that Satyagraha is soul force as opposed to armed weapon strength. Self-purification is another name of Satyagraha. It means that Satyagraha is the soul force attainable by self-purification. It is also defined as an attitude of mind. It is also defined as a kind of education in the real sense of the term and as the important tool for the people's education and awakening. Gandhi discovered the term satyagraha during his endless non-violent resistance movement against racial discrimination in South Africa, and he deployed satyagraha also in Indian independence movement. According to Gandhi, satyagraha is just a new for the law of suffering. It is a relentless search for truth and a determination to reach truth without resorting to hatred, rancor, ill will, or animosity. It is an action-oriented search and adherence to truth and a non-violent fight against untruth. For Gandhi, it was a way of life of living in truth. Satyagraha is a force that works silently and apparently slowly. It can be used by individuals as well as communities. It may be used by political as in domestic affairs. It can be used alike by men, women, and children. It is an ethical and spiritual weapon used only by men inclined to the ethical way of life. Satyagraha is utter self-effacement, greatest humiliation, greatest patience, and brightest faith. It is its own reward. It is gentle, never wounds. It must not be the result of anger or malice. It was conceived as a complete substitute for violence. It teaches us the art of living as well as dying. Satyagraha is the unification of two most important principles, Satya and Ahimsa. The word Satya, truth, is derived from Sat, which means being. Nothing is or exists in reality except truth. That is why Sat or truth is the most important name of God. So it is said that truth is God and God is truth. Devotion to this truth is the sole justification for our existence. All our activities should be centered in truth. Truth should be the very breath of our life. There should be truth in thought, truth in speech, and truth in action. Gandhi compares satyagraha to a banyan tree in which satya, that is the truth, and ahimsa, that is non-violence, together represent the parent trunk with innumerable branches. Truth is impossible without love. Hence, satyagraha is the truth force or the love force. With satya combined with ahimsa, we can bring the world our fate. Satyagraha in its essence is nothing but the introduction of truth. Gandhi mentions 3 principles of satyagraha. The first principle deals with the goal, the second with the means, and the third principle with the results of satyagraha. From the law point of view, the goal is the service of people, and from the higher, it is moksha. Regarding means and ends, Gandhi says that whatever is achieved by certain means can be retained by the same means. A thing achieved by force can be retained only by force, and that which has been won by love can be retained only by love alone. Hence, whatever is achieved by satyagraha can be retained only by satyagraha, and it is impossible to retain by physical force that which has been achieved by satyagraha. The result of satyagraha is invariably good if the principles are followed strictly. It can be practiced without thinking of the result. It makes no difference whether the result is achieved or not. Satyagrahi. Someone who practices satyagraha is a satyagrahi. A satyagrahi is one who gives up his everything for the sake of truth. He renounces his property, parts from his relatives, and sacrifices his own life. He enjoys the highest degree of freedom as he is fearless, never becomes a slave of another. Strict adherence to truth for many years changes the satyagrahi into a realized, a perfect man. No other power can intimidate him from completing his work, since he is afraid of none but God. A satyagrahi must have faith in truth and pursue only truth. He should be indifferent to wealth, and truths always do not coexist. He must be a man of God who will compel reverence and love even of the opponent by the purity of his life, the utter unselfishness of his mission, and the breadth of outlook. His endeavor is to build up such a classless society by means of a constructive program. Satyagrahi is obliged to break away from family attachments. He alone can be satyagrahi who has true faith in religion, who leaves everything to God and lives in contentment and happiness. But he is never defeated in this world. Knowing that his body has been given by God, he tries to be a worthy tenant by having healthy and sound constitution, having his tongue under the control in order to control his speech and palate, has no false notion of prestige or status, and has a sense of fortitude. Qualifications of a satyagrahi. Number 1. He must have a living faith in God and true religion. Number 2. He must believe in truth and non-violence. Number 3. he must be leading a chaste life. Number 4, he must be a habitual khadi wearer and spinner. Number 5, he must be free from the use of intoxicants. Number 6, he must not harbor ill will or bitterness. Number 7, he will always try to overcome evil by good, anger by love, untruth by truth, and himsa by ahimsa. Basic postulates of Satyagraha. Number 1, truth. It is the core of Gandhian philosophy of Satyagraha. Satyagrahi minus truth is zero. Satyagraha is based on truth. For Gandhi, it was not a mere perception of truth which mattered. What was more important for him was speaking the truth, acting the truth, and realizing the truth in every breath of life and action. Gandhi identified God with truth. According to Gandhi, truth is God and God is truth. So, in our fight for social change, we must hold fast to truth and truth alone. Number 2, non-violence. To Gandhi, the path of truth is narrow as it is straight. As a result, truth and non-violence are inseparable. It is impossible to realize perfect truth without non-violence. Satyagraha is impossible without non-violence. It literally means non-killing or non-injury. It is such a state of physical and mental discipline that can move the core of human heart and bring a change of heart in the so-called enemies. Number 3, faith in God. Gandhi emphasizes that a Satyagrahi must be a believer in God. A Satyagrahi has no other stay but God. One who has any other stay or depends on any other help cannot offer Satyagraha. Number 4, brotherhood of man. To Gandhi, brotherhood of man means that we are one of another. It means that you cannot injure your neighbor without injuring yourself or vice versa. Satyagraha aims at change of heart through non-violent, noble and friendly action. Number 5, supremacy of moral law. Satyagraha is based on moral force, the force of truth and justice, the force of self-purification and self-suffering. Gandhi made Satyagraha the moral equivalent of war. It is a way of life based on the laws of love and holiness. Insistence of moral means does not imply that evil, injustice, tyranny and exploitation are to be tolerated. Voice of Satyagraha. For the success of Satyagraha and in order to make the Satyagrahi intellectually, morally and spiritually strong enough to withstand enough all temptations, provocations and inflictions, Gandhi prescribed certain cardinal principles or vows, a code of conduct to be observed by them. The vows fall into two categories, principal and subsidiary. The principal vows include truth, that is satya, non-violence, that is ahimsa, celibacy, that is brahmacharya, control of the palate, non-stealing and non-possession, that is aparigraha. The subsidiary vows consist of social and religious equimindedness, bread labor, swadeshi, fearlessness and humility. Number 1, truth. We must be truthful in thought, word, and deed. Truth is to be realized by devoted, constant practice and indifference to all other interests in life. The realization of truth can only be attained by the man of pure detachment. Number 2, non-violence. It literally means non-killing or non-injury. It is not enough to take the life of any living being. The follower of this vow may not hurt physically or mentally even those whom he believes to be unjust. He may not agree with them, he must love them. Number 3, celibacy or brahmacharya. This vow mentioned that one does not look upon any woman with a lustful eye. He has to control his animal passions. If he is married, he will not have a carnal mind regarding his wife, but will consider her as his lifelong friend and will establish with her the relationship of perfect purity. Number 4, control of the palate. This vow is the first essential in the observance of the vow of brahmacharya. An aspirant and striver for brahmacharya should cultivate a feeling that he is eating not to satisfy the palate but just to keep body, mind and soul in perfect health. Number 5, non-stealing. To take another person's property without his knowledge or permission, or in the belief that it is an unclaimed property, is no doubt an act of stealing. In his opinion, all amassing of wealth above and beyond one's legitimate requirements is theft. Number 6, non-possession or aparigraha. It is not enough not to possess and keep much, but it is necessary not to keep anything which may not be absolutely necessary for our bodily wants. Thus, if one can do without chairs, one should do so. The follower of this vow will therefore, by constant reflection, simply his life. The satyagrahi should also follow the subsidiary vows. He should be a firm believer in social and religious equality and in the equality of sexes. A satyagrahi must earn his bread and other primary needs of life by laboring with his hands. He should require the use of simple and simple-made clothing to the exclusion of even fancy buttons, foreign cuts, etc. And so will Swadeshi be applied to every department of life. He should be free from the fear of kings, people, caste, families, thieves, robbers, and even death. Detachment, openness, tranquility of mind, absence of prejudice, mildness, forgiveness, etc. are altogether called humility. It should be the quality of a satyagrahi. Forms and techniques of satyagraha. The forms of satyagraha admit of various methods to be used in successive stages. The most important of among them are basic education and other items of constructive program, persuasion through reason, persuasion through change of heart by self-suffering, and persuasion through non-violent direct action or non-violent non-cooperation, which may take the forms of strike, picketing, boycott and hijrat, ultimately culminating in civil disobedience. Basic education. Gandhi aimed at the all-round development of man's physical, mental, moral and spiritual faculties. So he devised a scheme of basic education which aimed at the all-round development of man. He described the system of basic education will lay the foundation of a juster social order in which there is no unnatural division between the haves and have-nots. Constructive programs. It was an integral and positive aspect of Gandhi's Satyagraha movement. It was employed for the promotion of communal harmony and removal of social evils like untouchability, unemployment, and illiteracy. It is designed to build up the nation from the very bottom. Handling of Satyagraha without the constructive program is like a paralyzed hand attempting to lift a spoon. Constructive program consists of communal unity, removal of untouchability, prohibition, khadi, other village industries, village sanitation, basic education, adult education, uplift of women, education in health and hygiene, provincial languages, propagation of Rashtrabhasha, promotion of economic equality, kisans, labor, adivasis, lepers and students. Conversion through persuasive argumentation. Along with education and constructive program, it is necessary to bring about revolution by conversion through rational and gentle persuasion. A satyagrahi has first of all to try to conceive his opponent by reason and mobilize public opinion against the evil which he is out to eradicate. When public opinion is sufficiently roused against an evil, the strongest will not dare to practice. An intelligent and awakened public opinion is the most potent weapon of a satyagrahi. Conversion through self-suffering. According to Gandhi, the next step that the satyagrahi has to take in the direction of meaning the evil doer from the evil is to appeal to his heart by patient self-suffering, sympathy, sincerity and humility. Voluntary self-suffering opens the eyes of the evil doer. Having failed to convince the evil doer merely by reason, the satyagrahi seeks by means of self-suffering. Fasting. It is the most delicate form of satyagraha. It aims at self-purification and concentrates the energy of the soul and forces the opponent to see reason. Gandhi was himself the author of fasting. It is a way of personal cleansing and penance. Gandhi enunciated certain general principles and conditions under which a satyagrahi could resort to fasting. He should fast only as a last resort when all the avenues of redress have been explored and have failed. Suffering even unto death is the last weapon of a satyagrahi. Fasting should be undertaken either for self-purification or self-restraint. It should be employed only as a species of tyaga and never as a method of exercising under pressure on the opposite party. Non-violent non-cooperation. It is a sacred duty and an alternative to anarchy. It is the most expeditious method known to the world of winning over opponents. It indeed means renunciation of the benefits of a system with which we non-cooperate. According to Gandhi, non-cooperation is a measure of discipline and self-sacrifice without which no nation can make real progress. It may take the form of strike, picketing, boycott, hartal, very peaceful stoppage of work, and hijrat, that is deshat tyaga, ultimately culminating in civil disobediences. Disobedience. It is an active, strong and extreme form of satyagraha. It is a necessary part of non-cooperation. It is conceived as a substitute for violence or armed rebellion. It is a protest against unjust laws. Its ultimate aim is to substitute voluntary cooperation for involuntary cooperation and willing obedience for forced obedience. It can be practiced only as a last resort. It is of two types, offensive and defensive. Either of the two types may be offered by single individuals as completely independent units or by masses collectively. Now, let us see some limitations of satyagraha. Gandhi's satyagraha had moral and political significance, but it also suffered from several limitations. Gandhi rightly argued that human beings are generally affected by the suffering of others and regret that suffering even if they are unable or unwilling to do anything about it. If they thought the suffering deserved, their reaction would be different. Gandhi was wrong to argue that satyagraha never failed and that it was effective under all conditions. To his credit, he insisted that it was meant to succeed and achieve results. It was an article of faith for him that all human beings had souls which could be touched and activated. He said that satyagraha presupposes a sense of decency on the part of the opponent, an open society in which his brutality can be exposed, and a neutral body of opinion that can be mobilized against him. Gandhi insisted violence need not be accompanied by hatred and ill will or be uncontrolled. Like non-violence, it too can be restrained, measured, born out of love for both the victims and the perpetrators of injustice, and used to arrest human degradation. Now, let us summarize the session. This session introduces Mahatma Gandhi's technique of satyagraha against the evils that are prevalent in a society. Here we discuss about the origin and meaning of satyagraha. Satyagraha is based on the two pillars that are truth and non-violence. The one who practices satyagraha is known as satyagrahi. A satyagrahi should qualify certain qualities. Here also mention about it. The basic postulates of satyagraha mentioned here have great importance nowadays. The basic postulates included truth, non-violence, supremacy of moral law, faith in God, brotherhood of man, etc. Here also mention the important vows which should be taken by a satyagrahi. There are principal vows and subsidiary vows that should be undertaken by a satyagrahi. Finally, it describes about the different forms and techniques of satyagraha and also its limitation. Now, try to work out the given assignments. Number 1. Explain the origin and meaning of satyagraha. Number 2. Describe the qualifications of a satyagrahi. Number 3. Discuss briefly about the basic postulates of satyagraha. Number 4. Mention the vows that should be taken by a satyagrahi. Number 5. Evaluate the different forms of satyagraha. Now, I can suggest some books for your further studies. 1. Mahatma Gandhi's Philosophy of Satyagraha, written by Thakur Gaurikant, published by Kishore Vidyaniketan, Varanasi in 1988. 2. The Story of My Experiments with Truth, an autobiography of Mahatma Gandhi, published by Navjeevan Publishing House, Ahmedabad in 1956. Satyagraha in South Africa, written by Mahatma Gandhi, first edition, published by S. Ganeshan, Madras in 1928. 4. Fundamentals of Gandhism, written by Mishra Datta Anil, published by Mittal Publications, New Delhi in 1955. 5. Mahatma Gandhi's View of Satyagraha, written by Sharma M.L., published by Gandhi Bhavan Newsletter, University of Delhi, Volume 11 in 1989. 6. Saga of Satyagraha, written by Divakar R.K., published by Gandhi Peace Foundation, New Delhi in 1969. Thank you for watching this session. See you next time. Until then, bye.
Peace and goodwill. Now you know a little bit about Mahatma Gandhi's philosophy of nonviolence, lifted up in detail. And then you heard a small video that talked about the alleged dark side of Mahatma Gandhi. I worked in the Casey administration. I say that over and over again, let people know that's what I did. Reporting to Jack Ty, who was charged over operations. And we had a affirmative action program. And we tried to do everything that we could try to lift up and correct problems of injustice and anything that was and discrimination and a lack of equality in employment, and also in the acquisition of contracts and doing business with government. It was quite a struggle, but it was all rooted in the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement, which was it's kind of exploded. We can't say any one person created the affirmative action movement. The affirmative action movement was a action. I mean, let me say this: the movement, the civil rights movement, the affirmative action movement. Civil rights was not a movement. The civil rights was an instrument that was developed to correct the problem. The civil rights movement exploded all over the country in different communities. And no, you can't say no one person started. People like to give credit to Dr. Martin Luther King for starting the civil rights movement. He did not start the civil rights movement. That is a lie. That is not true. But he did become one of the most significant leaders in the civil rights movement. That thing, the philosophy of Mahatma Gandhi, which is nonviolent and passive resistance. But there was another individual that King took a look at, and his name was Henry David Thoreau. Henry David Thoreau of Massachusetts believed totally in the concept of nonviolence and passive resistance. He believed in peace and goodwill. So this was something that Martin Luther King picked up from both Mahatma Gandhi and both Henry David Thoreau. Now, both those philosophies merged together, directed King. And there were other individuals in the civil rights movement. Some of them was not so peaceful. Some of them, shall we say, were not really violent. Most groups were not violent, but they do believe in lifting up bloodstained banner, marching, protesting, and they believe in, that we say nonviolence, but preserve what we call the right of self-protection. And eventually, in India, in spite of the great emphasis on nonviolence, eventually some Indians did take up arms against the British. That happened. There were some folks who believed in fighting, and they fought to bring about change within the country of India. That happened. That was not a myth. They did fight, and so that was it. And Gandhi was killed by someone who allegedly was in support of him in some ways, but he was shot down and assassinated. The same as Dr. Martin Luther King assassinated. These people who in nonviolence often taken off and even lost the president. JFK was assassinated. His brother, who was running, who after JFK had left the scene and had been assassinated, his brother Robert Kennedy ran, and he was assassinated. So there was a lot of killing going on. There was a lot of assassinations and all this in the midst of when you had some people in philosophy who said they were nonviolent. So nonviolent philosophy did not stop individuals from using violence and that kind of thing. I had a wonderful dad. My dad was was not a violent person, but if you hit him, you're in trouble. Arm yourself or harm yourself. My father believed in himself and his family. We had a group of people in the movement, the so-called Black Panther Party, and the whole philosophy of arm yourself or you harm yourself, that they had a legal right to bear arms and to protect themselves. And then in certain portions, in certain areas of the country, we had a group called the Deacons for Defense and Justice. They saw themselves as overseers and protectors of the individuals that were out there marching and demonstrating. And their thing was, hey, we're not going to initiate violence, but if you come in our community and you're going to try to hurt us and try to destroy us, we will indeed destroy you. That would not be this group in Louisiana, and then spread to different parts of the country. In Maryland, for example, there was a Deacons for Defense of Injustice. That was it. So we have a lot of things that were lifted up. We cannot really, shall we say, somehow blemish greatness of Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi was effective. India became a free nation. They had its struggles. I think Nehru was one of the first prime ministers of India. He was a close ally, friend, and brother of Mahatma Gandhi. So they did their thing. Dr. King did get something from him. Had a guy gentleman in the Tracy administration named Harris Woolford that also lifted up. It's been a great pleasure discussing with you this whole issue of nonviolence. I'm still up in Lebanon, at the Lebanon Valley Farmers Market, 35 South 8th Street. We're still there. New owner is having an open house this weekend coming up. 3 days, I think it's Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And he's urging people to come in. We have a bunch of new vendors that are selling all Hickory's fried fish. We have seafood. We have African food. We have new vendors that are coming in and doing their thing. So you come on in and take a look, and you'll see a big sign near the front door said African Paradise. Come on in and take a look at it. So, hey, thank you for tuning in. And this is Richard James, your neighbor and your friend, in the words of the late, great friend of mine, till we are. God bless, and so long. Good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you again for tuning in to the Richard James Show. Our African and our African American programs are set up to educate you on what's going on in this world. We thank you for taking out the time to listen. Let us hear from you sometime also. So this is your neighbor and your friend signing off. Until I see you again next week and hear from you again next week. So long. God bless.